Something strange is happening on the Columbia River. It's June of 2026, and the annual Chinook salmon migration is underway. But this year, something is different. Rather than migrating on schedule, a high percentage of the fish are getting stuck here, right below the third dam on the river. For 90 years, the dams on this stretch of river have been equipped with fish ladders. But this year, the ladders aren't working. It turns out that the dams are killing the fish. I've been hearing rumors about adult Chinook salmon getting stuck below John Day Dam, and so I decided to go down to the river and see for myself. It's a beautiful morning on the Columbia. Morning, Scott.
Hey, morning. Thanks for coming all the way down.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good.
This is Scott. He is a hydropower expert and works with public utilities all over the Northwest. And he tipped me off that there was something wrong with this year's adult salmon migration.
So the fish are making it through Bonneville Dam as usual. They're making it through the Dalles Dam as usual. And suddenly they get to John Day Dam and they cannot find the fish ladder because the deluge of water that is hitting them, they're unable to find that trace or that signal to find the fish ladder. And they get stuck right over there.
It works like this. Adult fish instinctively swim upstream against the current, staying close to the shore and looking for certain speeds of water and places to rest. When they reach a dam, they naturally start searching for an alternative to the main river channel. And in most cases, the alternative that they find is a fish ladder. A fish ladder is designed to simulate a natural stream. What you do is build a series of pools 1 foot higher than the one before it. This gives the fish a current to swim against, plus plenty of room to rest as they make their way upstream. Beginning in the 1930s, all of the main stem dams on the lower Columbia River have had fish ladders. And since 1938, we've had an accurate count of how many fish went through these ladders each and every day. Here are the numbers of how many Chinook salmon passed the 4 lower Columbia River dams in 2025. You can see groups of fish move up the river in waves, starting at Bonneville, then passing the Dalles Dam a few days later, then John Day, and finally McNary. But in 2026, the pattern looks different. How long did it take to solve the problem?
Very funny because they have a weekly call. My understanding is it took several days of monitoring the bad conditions before they finally acquiesced that they could have an emergency order and reduce the spill. So you're ultimately talking about days of those salmon hanging out, waiting, trying to find the fish ladder, while folks in Portland were having back and forth discussions about what to do about the salmon.
So, what changed? One of the things I've learned as part of researching this project is that the way the dams are operated and who decides how the dams are operated has changed several times over the years. It's not just the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which owns the dams, or the Bonneville Power Administration, which sells the electricity from the dams. More recently, we've been seeing operational changes come from federal court.
A federal court ruling issued yesterday in Oregon.
A federal judge has ordered the restoration of salmon protections along the Columbia and Snake Rivers.
The case centers on how the federal government manages hydroelectric power.
In 2025, a lawsuit was filed by the National Wildlife Federation and several partners, demanding that the government take dramatic action to save endangered salmon. The lawsuit said, fish are at extinction crisis levels that are unlikely to be able to sustainably improve without urgent action. The lawsuit demanded 2 things. 1, that reservoir levels be dropped down to minimum operating pool to supposedly speed up the current in the rivers. And 2, open up the spillway gates wider and for longer periods of time to help flush juvenile fish downstream. Remember, the fish ladders are only for the adult fish swimming upstream at the end of their lives. Several months later, their descendants, about 2 to 4 inches long, need to make it downstream. Before the dams, juvenile fish would basically get swept down by the current. But now that we have dams that slow down the rivers, these juvenile fish have to swim downstream for longer periods of time. And unlike their adult relatives, they may have trouble finding their way through the dam safely. a federal judge ruled in favor of the plaintiffs and granted one of their two requests. With only a couple weeks to prepare, he ordered that dam operators open the spillway gates from March to September. This was a massive increase from the previous plan, with no time to simulate how this might affect river operations.
2026, the judge agreed with plaintiffs. It's going to be operated with a 24/7 spill regime, meaning a massive amount of water coming through all of the dams at once, all the time.
And how did that affect the adults trying to swim upstream?
But we know at Lower Monumental and we know at John Day Dam, we had some serious problems where the adults could not find the fish ladder. In fact, at one point, we had a 75% rate of fish not being able to make it back up the fish ladder.
The question I now have is, why is this being allowed to happen? In all my research for this project, it's become really obvious that this whole thing is not being driven by the scientists who actually work on the river and the dams, but by the NGOs, the nonprofit organizations who have filed the lawsuits and gone to court to try and get spill increased at the dams. And when you look at these activists' social media, it's really interesting how they're framing this whole issue of increased spill.
The biggest win, increased spill. Basically, spill is letting water go over the top of the dams instead of through the turbines. It's like a water slide for juvenile salmon. It helps them get to the ocean faster and safer.
A water slide for fish. I decided to do some digging and reached out to some actual fisheries scientists, accomplished and respected researchers with tons of peer-reviewed papers who have devoted their lives to this subject. And here's what they had to say.
We know that some spill is good, so more spill should be better. At first blush, it sounds like it would be true, but the data really doesn't support that. We know that some spill is good for fish passage and fish survival, but as you increasing spill, we are really not seeing an improvement in juvenile survival through the system, or in that fact, adult returns coming back.
Survival has been brought way up compared to where it was in the mid to late 60s when the Snake River dams were first being constructed. There's no question there was problems back in the 60s. They were running all the fish through the turbines and there was 30% or more of the fish being killed. So there were big issues. Those issues have been very largely fixed. I'm not saying that the dams are perfect and don't kill fish. They certainly do. But let's put the numbers in some perspective for folks.
All right, let's do it. Let's put the numbers in perspective. There are 4 ways to get juvenile salmon downstream of a dam: the power plant, the bypass, deep spill, and surface spill. Some are going to have higher survival rates than others. And when you multiply those losses across 8 dams, you can really see the negative cumulative effect that the hydro system can have. The first option is the power plant. Now, contrary to popular belief, fish don't actually get chopped up by the turbines when they go through. The blades aren't that sharp and they aren't spinning that fast. However, it's not a great experience for the fish to go through the extreme pressure changes of a hydropower plant, but if they do, they have around an 87% survival rate. If all the juvenile fish went through all 8 dams like this, we would only have a third of them left by the time they got to the lower river. But that's why we have method number 2. To help fish avoid the turbines, dedicated bypass channels were installed that deflect the fish away from the turbines and around the dam through a dedicated channel. This method has a survival rate of basically 100%, but for the sake of this exercise, let's say 99. But unfortunately, the majority of juvenile fish don't use either one of these options. They get pulled through the deep spillway. This can be a horribly traumatic way for juvenile fish to pass a dam. Remember, juvenile fish only stay in the top 10 feet of the water column, but the gates on the spillways are around 50 feet tall, which means that fish either have to dive down or get sucked down to go under the gates before getting blasted out the other side. It has all the same violent pressure changes as going through the turbines, but with a lot more disorientation and risk of predators. The extreme pressure change combined with the supersaturated water can cause nitrogen bubbles to form in the fish's nervous system, causing damage that can confuse, incapacitate, or even kill the fish in a matter of days. At best, passage through the spillway has around a 95% survival rate, but due to factors downstream, it could be even lower. But in the 2000s, we came up with a solution to this, an extra structure mounted on the back of the dam called a spillway weir that allows the spillway to just skim the top few feet of water from the lake above. giving the fish an easy and stress-free way past the dam with zero pressure changes. This new surface spill method has a 99% survival rate, and when used by itself, it catches the majority of the juveniles going downstream.
Spill is like a water slide for juvenile salmon.
What's ironic about this statement is that she's talking about the court-mandated deep spill, but it's actually the surface spill that really is like a water slide. The surface spill skims the top few feet of the reservoir where the fish are already swimming and provides a gentle trip over the dam. But instead, the new court order requires maximum deep spill at higher volumes and for longer periods of time than ever before. Now, in normal circumstances, some deep spill is perfectly fine. There are always periods of time where every dam has to use its spillway, and there haven't been measurable problems with the fish. But what we're seeing today is such an unprecedented volume that there really aren't models to predict how it will affect the ecology.
Starting as early as the late 1990s, the projects were required to start spilling more water. The amounts that have been called the spill then have kind of incrementally increased over time. To be honest, as we've had different court orders and judges' decisions saying we need to spill more water at the dam.
Has that data held up over this 20-year experiment with these spill mandates? Like, is more spill resulting in more fish making it downstream alive?
The data, it does not really support that, no.
So if extreme amounts of spill aren't good for the fish, why are the NGOs going to court to force the dams to do it? There are a dozen or more advocacy groups and nonprofits who have as their stated goal to rid the Columbian Snake Rivers of dams. But this is a tough sell to the American people when fully half of the electricity in the Pacific Northwest comes from hydropower. Pretty much the only way you could get away with this line of thinking is to convince people that the energy from these dams isn't that big of a deal to begin with.
Like, these dams 100% are coming down. The value's diminishing, and it's going to continue to decline, particularly on the electricity front.
Power generated from Northwest dams fell last year to the lowest level in 2 decades.
And you see the generation year over year get smaller and smaller and smaller.
Here's a graph showing every drop of water that went through the furthest downstream Snake River Dam in 2024. As you can see, the flow increases dramatically during spring runoff, then stabilizes in the summer and fall. This is how much of that water went through the spillways. And this is how much went through the power plant. Because of the mandatory spill rules, it's basically illegal to operate the power plants in the lower Snake River during the months of April, May, and June. That's like opening up a restaurant and then learning that there's a law requiring you to be closed from 11 to 1 and from 6 to 9. Sure, you can open your restaurant, you're just not allowed to serve food when people are hungry. Basically, the dams are not permitted to produce power during the months when there's the most water in the river. The federal dams on the Columbian Snake Rivers don't currently cost the taxpayers any money. The maintenance and operation expenses are added up by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who then pass that number on to the Bonneville Power Administration. The BPA uses that number to set the wholesale power rate for every station. The dams are literally paid for by the energy that they produce.
Hey y'all, Mitch Cutter here with the Idaho Conservation League to talk a little about the lower Snake River dams and the energy they provide to the region. Back in 2018, the 4 dams combined produced about 1,000 megawatts of electricity. Last year, in 2024, they produced only about 600 megawatts of energy. That's a decline of roughly 40% that is mostly caused by climate change. Climate change is reducing how much snow we have here in the region, and thus how much water is flowing through our rivers.
Here is a measurement of how much water flowed through the Snake River during the time period that Mitch referred to. And here is that same measurement from the 1970s to the present day. So, question for you. Do you think that the lower Snake River dams are producing less power because there's a 40% drop in water flows? Or is it because of this? By the way, the new spill rules extend this gap all the way into the fall, and the anti-dam activists have expressed a desire for a year-round spill in the future.
The court granted nearly all the spill operations we asked for, and for anyone worried about the lights staying on or barges moving, the court noted that these measures shouldn't significantly impact river operations.
So basically, these same activist groups who are pushing for all this excessive spill are turning around and telling the public that the 4 lower Snake River dams are producing a tiny amount of power and you wouldn't miss it if they were to go away. I'm curious though, what do the actual power grid experts have to say? I see a lot of messaging out there on Instagram from the activist community reassuring everyone that spilling all this water and taking power out of the grid is in no way going to increase the risk of blackouts.
I think that's just crazy. That doesn't make any sense to me. Every day, men and women across the Pacific Northwest are working magic and miracles sometimes to keep the lights on, and consumers don't even know. And there are elements like taking a giant swath of power production out of the system that make it even harder for them to do those jobs. And we get very close to having a reliability emergency. And that is what our experts are saying is, as we get further into the year, we get into the hot, dry months, we're very worried about not having enough electricity supply to meet all the demand of air conditioners and other basic needs in our electrified world.
All of this excessive spill has consequences. It makes everyone's energy more expensive. It reduces the supply of energy, including during heat waves. It disrupts the navigation industry and puts people's safety at risk on the water. But worst of all, it's failing to help the very species that it's supposedly designed to protect. Here in the Northwest, we enjoy the cleanest energy portfolio in the country. Our dams take the power of falling water and don't just generate power. They provide clean transportation for our food supply. They provide irrigation water that grows fruits and vegetables. They protect our cities from floods and ensure consistent flows during droughts. And the data is clear. The court-ordered spill requirements are bad for salmon, bad for clean energy, and bad for everyone who lives in the Pacific Northwest. We know how to maximize clean energy from the dams, and we know how to safely get salmon through the dams. I'll leave you with this. If we know that excessive spill is bad for salmon and bad for clean energy, why do we continue to do it? Thanks for watching.